Hello, everyone. It's me, Andrew. I'm here in my home in lovely Ligonier, Pennsylvania. Usually, I try to do these at Star Cottage Studio, which is my working studio, and also the new home of our shipping department for Allegory Gallery. So, we're super excited about that, and we'll do an update on that probably sometime this week. We'll let you know when that posts, but it's going to be 1 year soon. 1 year, I think, on what is it? The 29th. So we're super excited. Anyway, so today I thought we would do something a little bit different. If you don't know who I am, my name is Andrew Thornton. I'm the co-owner and creative director of Allegory Gallery in lovely Ligonier, Pennsylvania. And my formal training is in mixed media and painting. I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and that's where I was lucky enough to work with a lot of really amazing instructors. And so I should preface this by saying that everybody does things differently. And this is just one of the many, many techniques that's out there and available for all of you in the great big world of art making. Some of the places that we're streaming this are bead specific, but I really do think that learning to draw is, if you aren't comfortable, if you aren't comfortable at drawing, it's super helpful. And for one, it's a great way to capture ideas. So if you have an idea for a big necklace or jewelry and you want to test out the proportions, this is a good way to do that. So I always encourage people to utilize drawing, even if they aren't specifically interested in two-dimensional work and they're more into like sculpture or beadwork or bead embroidery or whatever. It's a great way to plan things out, and it's another tool in your toolbox. So I hope you, even if you aren't interested in becoming a painter or whatever, this will be useful to you. I think it's useful in general. So one of the things that we like to do here at Allegory Gallery is we ask all of you what you want to see. So yeah, we asked folks if what we were like, what do you want to see? And one of our friends said that they enjoyed it when I do drawing tutorials and demos. So yeah, here we are. We're given what the people want. You ask and you shall receive. Maybe, within reason. So yeah, we're super excited to be able to share this. And yeah, hopefully you all will find this useful. All right. So I see a couple of folks have tuned in. Lots of folks actually. Hopefully you all are having a great week. If you didn't see yesterday I did a quick riveting demo. So if you missed that, check that out. You can see all of our videos, or at least most of them, over on our YouTube channel. And that is, let me find the little banner here for you. The youtube.com/Allegory Gallery. I think there's another way of getting it. It's www.youtube.com/C/Allegory Gallery. And that takes you to the channel page and you can see all the different videos. And we've been working on developing a plan to add more content there. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're super close to reaching our 1,000 subscriber goal. And be sure also to turn on notifications. So there's a little bell icon. Let me lower this a little bit. I feel like I've got like a little chin strap on with that banner. But anyway, so if you If you don't want to miss anything that we've got going on, please go on over to YouTube, hit that little bell, and subscribe. We do a lot there. We also do a lot here on Facebook. And if you haven't had a chance, uh, head on over and like our Facebook page. I know some of these places that we're streaming are not our Facebook page, and you may be like, I'm watching on your Facebook page. Why I need to go over to your Facebook page if I'm already there? Well, maybe you're not there. So head on over there. And of course, head on over to our website. That's allegorygallery.com. And that is how we fund all of these things. So we add a ton of content and free information out there. We're always trying to democratize information and knowledge, and we want to encourage and get you out there making and creating. But the only way we can really do that is if we, make money somehow. And I think I'm kind of ruined for working for other people. So go buy some beads. We got some artwork, lots of different things available. And if you don't see it online, but you do see pictures of it in our social media, just give us an email. That's info@allegorygallery.com. And we'll be happy to help. Now, I do want to say that sometimes with the way that the server is kind of set up, if you're emailing from a business specific email, so Mary Jane at creativecatsforever.com, sometimes those emails get sent to our spam folder or junk folder. And that is the AI in our email program trying to sort out what's what. So if you haven't heard from us, just email us again and be like, hey, touching bases, did you get my last email? And we will be happy to see that, hopefully, and get back to you. Because there's a couple folks who've tried to email us recently, and their emails haven't gone through. And I'm like, well, what's happening? What's happening? So who knows? Sometimes, things happen. But if you do see something or need help, just email us and we'll be happy to help. All right. So I'm going to flip this camera around. You're going to see the ceiling for a minute or so, probably less than a minute. But, I'm kind of trying to moderate your expectations so that you are not disappointed. All right. So let me flip this around. All right, so for today's project, we've got a couple different things going on here. Trying to move my tax documents away and make sure that we have a nice kind of place to set up. I made these. You may have seen the thing about this. I'm going to snag up in Providence, Rhode Island in June. If you are also going to snag, be sure to say hello, because I think it'll be fun to meet some of y'all. If I don't hug you, don't take it personally. I'm not a big hugger in the first place. And then with what's going on in the world, I'm extra not going to hug. So if you're like, how come he didn't want to touch my body? That's why. All right. So for our project today, we're going to need some painter's tape. We're going to need something to draw. And that's our address in case you wanted to find out where we live. I think I saw Susan on here, who is our neighbor. It's not like it's hard to find where we live because there's a giant pumpkin creature on our front porch. So, and it's there year round. So it's not like it's a big mystery where we live. But yeah, so, well, I've got a couple different things. We'll flip through that. We will also need something to draw on. I've got some Bristol board here. And I like Bristol board. It's a nice, sturdy, smooth surface. It's really good for pens, markers. Basically, you can read this. It's acid free, which is really great. I did a lot of drawings when I was in college on newsprint, which is like the cheapest thing you can draw on, which is great for sketching and really fast kind of gestural work and things you're not 100% committed to. However, the newsprint is not archival. And so I have a pile of drawings that I'm kind of scared to go through because they're already kind of crumbling and super yellow. So this is good. It's got a smooth surface. It's great for this. Um, uh, I don't tend to recommend starting off with like watercolor paper. I know there's a couple folks out there who swear by drawing on watercolor paper, and I love watercolor paper. However, it can be a little bit, there's a texture to it. So when it comes to kind of fine drawings and stuff like that, it can be challenging. So just keep that in mind. Um, you could use printer paper if you want. You don't have to spend a lot of money to draw. You can doodle in the margins of whatever on the backs of different paper. But if you are going to be more serious about your artwork making, invest in some supplies, and they'll help you out as well. And they'll make your job easier, right? Okay, so this is the Bristol board. This is smooth Bristol board. This is hot pressed, I believe, which means that they heat the rollers when they roll it through, and that way it gets nice and smooth. Now, if you don't want to work on a piece this big, you can always cut this down. A paper cutter is also another really good investment. I use a paper cutter probably once a day, maybe every other day. Let's be real, I'm not making books and things every day, but every other day I use it, and it's a fairly well used piece of equipment in our household. So if you have access to a paper cutter, those are really great to get super clean edges when you cut your papers down, so that they're nice and smooth, and you don't have all this like wavy gravy style with the scissors, which can be cool too. But um, if you want it to be more precision, that's either, and it's faster too. So there's that. Now we'll need something to draw with. So I've got a couple different options. I've got the regular, just number 2 Dixon Ticonderoga pencils. I use these all the time. They're graphite pencils. One of my favorite pencils is an ebony pencil. This is one of the darkest pencils you can get. And it's super smooth. So it's a very soft uh, drawing material. So you can really smudge things and work with shadowing and shading. And that is good, but it can also be tricksy because it can get all over your hands, and then it can also transfer to your work. So you just have to be mindful of that. Sometimes that's less than desirable, but some people like that, some people don't. You also will probably need an eraser. I didn't bring an eraser, but in theory, you will need an eraser. But it's up to you. We can go into this a little bit more later. We will also need an X-Acto knife or some kind of sharp implement to cut a hole on something. or rather a square. We'll need some scrap paper. This is some scrap paper from one of my watercolor sketchbooks. And we're going to use that for a really cool thing. You'll have to keep watching if you want to see what we're going to do with this. We will also need an indelible pen. You can use a Sharpie. I like Identi pens. I think they're really wonderful. They stick to a lot of different surfaces. They're designed not to rub off on your identification when you have them. We're not sponsored by IdentiPen, but I can't recommend them enough because I use them all the time. I buy these in big boxes and I hoard them, and I'll let people use them sometimes, but then I'm like, what'd you do with my marker? I'm looking for my marker. Give me back my IdentiPen because I want that. All right, we will also need a ruler. It also helps if you have what's called a self-healing surface, which is a surface that you can cut into. If you do any kind of sewing or paper crafts, then you're probably familiar with those. Mine is currently at the Star Cottage Studio, so I don't have mine readily available. So I'm just going to use the back of the cardboard, which is fine and will work. But yeah. I should also mention that this technique that I'm going to be showing you is really good if you want to blow things up or shrink things down. You do have to figure out your math for this. I tend to go for easy math just because, I like easy math. I don't like hard math. Um, so just keep that in mind. If you're going to do any kind of ratios, then you kind of have to figure that out depending on what you're working with. And as we go in through this video, I'm going to show you a couple different things, and it will make more sense when you actually see it being done. All right. Because you may be like, ratios, math, what is this? What is this? I didn't sign up for this. I thought we were going to just draw some stuff. We will, but sometimes things math is real. All right. So the other thing and kind of last thing that we're gonna need is this Duralar. Now Duralar, you can use you can also get a wet media acetate. And so I like this because you can draw on it. If you have access to old school transparencies, back in the day, they used to have these things called overhead projectors. Who remembers those? I remember those. They'd turn the lights down and I'd instantly get sleepy. But anyway, so those were, if you don't know what an overhead projector is, it's basically a light in a box with a clear a transparent surface on top, and there's a mirror. And what happens is you put transparencies on top of it, and it gets bounced onto a screen that's a lot bigger, and it blows it up, and then you can kind of do your lessons that way. So nowadays, I was talking to some kid and they were like, we have these things called smart boards and whatever. So it's like in between smart boards and chalkboards, I guess. So anyways, if you have access to those transparencies, sometimes you can go to like Creative Reuse. There's a great place in Pittsburgh. They sell, it's kind of like a thrift store for art supplies. Sometimes they sell stacks of those transparencies for super, super, super duper cheap. So if you don't have this Duralar or wet media acetate, then you can get the transparencies and they work great. All right. So next thing we're going to do, I'm going to flip this over. Actually, I'm going to take this out. And this is going to make it a little bit easier to see what I'm talking about. All right, so I've got this piece of Duralar, and I'm going to bust out my ruler. And you want to make sure that your ruler can lay flat onto the surface. Sometimes if you're like me, finding a free surface is nigh impossible. And it can be a challenge sometimes. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a grid. And this is approximately, I have to stand up, 14 inches across. So let's start off with doing a grid of every half inch or so. Or let's do 1 inch so that we're not here for all time. Let's do 1 inch, y'all. All right. So I've got my Identi pen, and I'm just going to mark out wherever there's an inch mark. I'm just going to grid this out. When I was a kid, I used to make grids all the time, and I don't know why, but I think it's very satisfying. Got that one a little bit off. All right, and then I'm going to move over to the other end, and I'm going to work on that as well, and add those. And then be like, why am I watching him draw on the paper or just making this? Of course, I didn't bring the fresh Identi pen, but it's still working. This is the one that was in my a little bit dried out. Usually they're a lot darker. All right, and then I'm gonna flip this around and do this side as well. Now we want squares, so we have to make sure that we stick with the plan stand. And we're just going to do 1 inch increments on this side as well. Now, if you wanted to do, for some reason, you're like, I want to do rectangles. You can do that. However, the math gets kind of challenging when you get to some of the small, like decimals and stuff. And if you're like a wizard at fractions and stuff, then maybe that's for you. I kind of feel like it's less than desirable. It's easy for me to be like, oh, if I want this to be reduced by half, then I'll use half an inch. And so this is a technique that they've been using for a long, long time. And one of the old school ways of doing this, if you're a plein air painter, you might be familiar with this, is they would take a frame of wood. Let me see if I can flip this over. It's a little bit better. Maybe this one is fresher. Yeah, that looks fresher. So they would take a frame of wood and put nails every so often and string up a grid system based on those nail heads. And whenever they've got their easel set up, that's a quick way to get the composition down really fast. Sometimes it's tricky to train your eye to see things. And what I mean by that is your brain likes to do all kinds of funny things to change the way that you see things. So, for instance, sometimes the things we know will influence how we draw things. So sometimes, for instance, like we know there's two eyes. So in our brain, we're like, oh, we have to put the other eye. We're missing an eye. And then you kind of try to squeeze in that eye and it looks a little bit funny. Or, for example, you're trying to make something look super representational and, you're having to draw things out and you're not a machine. So sometimes that kind of will get kind of wavy gravy that way. Um, and that's fine. I generally don't use this method because I kind of like the way that it looks when I filter it through my brain. So I like um those that style of having it kind of translated through the way that I see the world. So, yeah. But the more you draw, also, the better you get at it. So that's another thing. All right. So I'm just going to quickly grid this out and hopefully I don't smear my lines. And you can kind of see what's happening. I'm going to use a shorter ruler actually because this one keeps sticking out super hard. And that's less than desirable. And so basically what we're doing is we're making a grid. Now I will say that this wet media acetate, it soaks up the ink and the marker. So you just have to be mindful of that. And that's so that stuff doesn't smear and you can draw on it and it will retain its the color or the drawing. Now you do want to be mindful when you're making your grid because if you mess up, this is permanent marker and you'll have little, like up here, I kind of waffled my hand a little bit and that has caused a little lump in there. And granted, that's not going to be the end of the world, but it will get in the way of some of your finer details if you're getting more hyper realistic in your rendering. So, you just kind of have to be mindful. And once you have this ready to go, you can use this over and over and over again. So usually this is kind of the one this is kind of tedious at first, but once you have it, then you'll have it forever or as long as you take care of it. Because sometimes they get dented up and whatever. So you just have to be mindful of that. And sometimes what I do to store these is to sandwich these in between two pieces of cardboard or just keep the package of the Bristol board or whatever you're doing and slip it in between the pages. And that will make sure that it doesn't get dented up. Because if it gets dented up, it's harder to use and less of a joy to use. So just be mindful of that. All right. And if your grid gets wonky, your drawing will end up being wonky as well. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes people say, oh, it's cheating to do it this way. And you know what? I don't know about that. I think that if you have the tool at your disposal, you should use it. At one point, the camera obscura was a new technology and and people were like, "Oh, that's cheating." But you know what? The paintings got better, so I don't know. I mean, I guess since I shouldn't say they got better, but they did improve in a lot of different ways, like when their rendering abilities to capture kind of that. I guess there's something, it's hard to, a lot of times when people talk about artwork, they want to say that there are no rules and you just have to express yourself and you can express yourself and that's great and wonderful. And I guess that's true to a degree, you never want to, limit somebody and their vision because who knows, maybe they're onto something. But what I will say is that there is a reason why people have been doing things a certain way and doing them for a long time. It's because they work, it's like a recipe. You can definitely cook however you want, and maybe your food is delicious and tasty, and that's it's great, wonderful, great, super. But sometimes it's good to have those tried and true kind of recipes that have been tested and passed down so that you, whenever, if you're new to something, you're not just kind of having to reinvent the wheel. You can just get straight into it. All right. So I've graded out it's a 1-inch grid on wet media acetate, this Duralar, and this is going to be our grid. I need to adjust this because the stand is kind of in the way and I'm sitting kind of like side saddle and I feel like a Victorian lady in one of those like Bridgerton or something. Um, all right. So we have this, and then we will also need to make a grid on our paper that we're going to be drawing on. But first, I'm going to do another little trick. Now I'm going to just roughly measure this and kind of find the center of this. So this is about 4.5, and this is roughly about 3.25. So this doesn't have to be perfectly even or anything, but I'm going to just make a mark here at 2 and 3. I'm going to do it here, 2 and 3, and draw this out. And this is a little bit more tedious. Like, I do think that there's something to say about, being able to be very gestural about things. I like a more gestural style myself, but, sometimes, you want to have more confidence in your rendering or whatever. And this is a good way to do that. All right. So basically, I'm trying to find something that's roughly in the center. It doesn't have to be exactly in the center, but I am making a little square that I'm going to be using. Now, this is also a good time if you have a push pin. I don't know if I have any push pins here. I may have given them all to William. Let me grab a push pin real quick, and I'll show you a trick to get super, super tight corners. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So I've got this push pin. It's kind of a miracle that I found it, considering that we've been moving my studio. And of course, it's like super crusty. But what I'm going to do is wherever those lines intersect, I'm going to make a pin mark. And I don't want to push too deep in this because this cardboard on the other side is the Duralar, and I don't want to puncture the other sheets of that Duralar. I'm going to make sure that this is nice and tight. I've got the X-Acto knife, and I'm just going to trace out that square with my X-Acto knife. And you can actually hear it. It's very satisfying to hear that kind of little pop as the X-Acto knife hits those little pinholes. And this is what's called a viewfinder. Now, this is a technique that, or a little trick that helps you block out extra information. So sometimes when we're looking at something, we are overwhelmed with visual information. So it's hard to see things as a shape because our mind is telling us, it's like there's this and there's this and there's this. So it takes time, but you can train yourself to be almost myopic and focus down onto small details. But in the interim, you can also make a viewfinder. And the viewfinder is a really helpful thing to help um, block out your vision. And sometimes it's good to have these on a bigger piece of paper, or something else like a piece of cardboard, or I don't know, wood or acrylic or something. And this is good to help really block out a lot of information if you're like doing a landscape or a portrait. There's lots of little tricks and tips and techniques that the old masters used to use in their rendering. And a lot of times people don't know about these things because people will purposely try to obscure things and keep things secret. Um, so it makes it look like they're more, I shouldn't say more impressive, but definitely it is something where people will sometimes do not tell you everything. And then when they obscure the stuff, then, then they're like, oh, um, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. Um, I'm really amazing. And you should pay a lot of money for this because it's so amazing. Which is cool, whatever. But I kind of believe in sharing information. So it kind of works opposite with the way that I do things. Now, we have this other piece of our Bristol board that we're going to get out, and we're going to grid that as well. And this is where you have choices. So if you want to blow a drawing up, you would make your grid maybe 2 inches, 2 by 2, instead of the 1 by 1. I am making this grid. I'm not using the Sharpie. Or the Adenta pen. I'm using a pencil because I want to be able to eventually erase these grids or paint over it or whatever, obscure it, so that it isn't there. Now, sometimes people will leave their grid visible, and that's fine. It's kind of an artifact of the process, which I think is kind of cool. But sometimes people they're not interested in seeing that. They want you to focus on what they're trying to render and not so much about the process. But for some people, they like to show evidence of the process, and I think it can be neat. So, and then also, how they did it then, because sometimes you'll go to like a gallery or whatever, and you're like, how did they do that? And I can always tell who the artists are when they go to shows, because then they're always kind of looking at the paintings or the sculptures or whatever, kind of off to the side and looking to see how they applied the paint or whatever. I remember going to a Fabian Marcaccio show in New York, and he used to paint with like colored silicone and create these kind of really luscious, almost woven pieces with this silicone, which was this translucent kind of rubbery medium. And so, like, I was super interested in how he developed that kind of process. And so I was all up in it to win it, as they say. I'm going to get the shorter one because I'm having the same issue I had before with me knocking into the side. And in theory, I could have probably prepped this before we started, so you don't actually have to watch me draw lines on a piece of paper. But sometimes when we make these videos, they're kind of on the fly, so I don't always get to prep as much as I would like. Hopefully, when we start developing more YouTube content, we will have more structured things, so I can do step outs beforehand, so that the videos are a little bit more succinct, and like we could do like fast forward over this part, so that you don't have to hear me rambling about Fabian Marcaccio in 2005 at the Gorney, Braven, and Lee Gallery. I'm surprised I remember that. All right, so I'm going to do this side, and then we can get started with picking a subject matter. Now, subject matter is tricky. Generally speaking, it's good to work from your own pictures and your own kind of imagery. When I was learning how to do the draw in high school, we would get the National Geographic out and kind of just do something similar to this, where we would draw pictures out of the National Geographic. And that's a super great way to learn how to render. However, if you were making your own artwork, it's good to use your own imagery if possible, or to augment it in ways that make it unique to you. And so you're not just like basically duplicating somebody else's work. So just keep that in mind. It's not a super big thing, most of us aren't going to be getting solo shows at the Whitney next week. So, it's not the end of the world about this if you do happen to use somebody else's image when you're rendering, but it is good or if you want to use somebody else's imagery to get permission. But for the sake of this kind of demo, I'm just going to show you by flipping through a magazine, and we'll find an image that we'll duplicate. Now, there's other techniques of doing this. You could easily trace this since we're doing a 1-to-1 ratio. However, I feel like when you trace an image, then you have to figure out then how you're going to transfer that image onto your final work surface. So that becomes another challenge in itself, where you would have to use a carbon paper or perforated holes, or there's a lot of different ways of doing that, where when you take a tracing and you transfer it to a work surface. That's a completely different and separate thing. So we're not going to go into that, because that in itself is its own kind of thing. So I also think that with the grid, you do get a little bit since it's not a complete facsimile, it's not a complete tracing, there is a little bit of the artist's hand in this process. So I think that that's a good, that's good. You get a little bit, it's not all just mindless duplication. There is a little bit of something into it. So yeah, so we've got some pictures. There's not actually that many pictures in here, at least not big ones. There's a lot of pictures of like the coronavirus. So I'm kind of flipping around. So far, I'm kind of interested in this. I'll put this off to the side. I'm not 100% interested in it, but it is a larger picture, which makes it easier to kind of look at and see in a demo. William subscribes to Scientific America, and I probably read it more than he does, but I think that it's kind of cool. So here are cicadas. That's where we live, Pennsylvania. And this is a kind of good one too. I will say that there are things that are more challenging when you're drawing. Like I tend not to do a lot of open mouths because I think teeth can be hard to draw. So this is a good kind of technique for that. If you are having challenges with a certain thing, like if you are having issues drawing hands, this is a good way to get that kind of down and, until you're more comfortable and can render it by sight. But if you're not comfortable, like I said, this is a great way of learning to draw and building those muscle memories. Now, I talk a lot about muscle memory, and it's true. Like, sometimes when you are, you have to do something over and over, and you're training your hand and your eye. You're training your eye to see things. Oh, I'll have to read this later. And this is on salamanders. We live in an area where they have, they're called hellbenders, and they're giant salamanders, and they get real big. They require very specific conditions, and they also are not the smartest of creatures in the sense that they eat their children. So they don't have a lot of babies. So, ooh, amber. So let's see. Once I figure out, I don't know if this is tempting because it's a really close picture. However, I don't know if I want to get that up close and personal to that dude's pores. But maybe. All right. So maybe we'll put this as an option. And I'll try to find one more option. I know. I'm just flipping through a magazine. You're like, I could be watching paint dry, and that would be more exciting. And that's an option. And I'm super snorchy from my allergies, so yeah. All right. I kind of like this one. There's all of these kinds of things. Maybe we'll do. So, all right. I'll give you options. All right. So we'll do option A, option B, and option C. Which one should we render? Option A, B, or C? Option A, B, or C? I see Donna says option A. I see option C, option B, option A, option A. So far, A is in the lead, and B and C are tied for second. All right. So let's go with option A then, and then I can kind of clear my area. I was going to have this as an option, but I kind of, I don't know. Maybe later. All right, so we've got option A here. I'm going to use that. So what I'm going to do, and don't be horrified too much, but I'm going to take this and put this in here, and I'm going to lightly score it with my X-Acto knife. And the reason why I'm doing this is because it will help. All right. So if you are having problems with distortion in your work, see how this is bent up like this, how the magazine was folded? Your eye does certain things and it will trick this, and you'll be, it will look, it may seem imperceptible right now, but it will change. There's subtle little things that will kind of distort this image, and there's a thing called foreshortening that can happen. Now, another thing to consider is the planes that you're working on. One of the biggest things I see happen is when an artist will work flat and their subject matter is vertical. And then when you look at it, it looks really great this way. And then you turn it up, and then their face looks really, really long or really short. And then you're like, what happened? I did it exactly the way that I saw it. Well, I don't understand. And what that is your eye does these tricks. So it will either, there's these sculptures, I believe they're done by Donatello, and they're called the Zucconi. And he sculpted these sculptures they were in the Palazzo del Vecchio, I believe. I could be making this up, but in theory, this is art history from like 20 years ago that I'm cherry picking from my memory. So maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. But anyway, so he had these sculptures called the Zucconi, and when he was working on them, people were like, "Whoa!" They called them pumpkin heads because he exaggerated the size of the head. So people would make fun of them and say, "Oh, they're the Zucconi because they're the pumpkin heads. Their heads is too big for their body." But when you're looking from down below, and like way far down below, the heads looked proportionally right. If he would have put a regularly kind of proportioned head, and did it, a regular proportion of a head on the sculpture, and then put it on the top of these pillars, then it would look like they would have a pinhead. So, because of the foreshortening, it would look like their feet were huge, 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 and their heads are like little tiny, little grapes compared. So sometimes when you're doing things, you have to play with proportion and have things exaggerated depending on how you see things. So just keep that in mind about when you're doing this from sight. Now with this, it's pretty like 1-to-1, so um, it's not going to be super important for what we're doing today, but just keep that in mind in case you are having challenges rendering. All right. So with that being said, I've got a kind of a wave in my paper. So, that's less than ideal. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tape this down, and I'm going to kind of tape this down in the center and spread it outward. And then I'm going to do that on the side as well. Now, if you don't have the back of this little Duralar board or whatever, and I'm going to tape it down on these sides just so that it doesn't move around a lot. And you're going to be like, what's he doing with all this tape everywhere? And it's just so that the reference material doesn't move around a lot. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay my grid on top of the reference. All right. And since we're not actually using up here, it doesn't matter if it doesn't kind of line up perfectly. Now, if we wanted this to be exactly, if we wanted to render this exactly the way that we wanted to, exactly this, exactly that, and have it be exactly the size, we would, of course, line this up so that it all measures in here and that all these kind of straight lines would all match up. But since I'm kind of using this not in an exact way. I'm kind of taking the information that I want from this. You could certainly duplicate this exactly the way it is. However, then just take a picture of it basically, or make a photocopy. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking the information that I kind of want. But this is a helpful thing that trains you how to see things and how to block out information. So I'm just taping this down so this doesn't move around. And you need to have it be taped at least on 3 sides. You could do all 4 sides, but I think it's good to have at least 3 sides down so that it doesn't move around, and you'll have a nice if this moves, then it gets kind of hard to actually do this. So also, now we're going to talk about composition really quick. Now, I think this is a really lovely composition. And you're going to have a little bit of a glare because this is the plastic. And I can't really do much about that because it's shiny plastic. I think this is kind of a strong composition where they've got a figure that's not front and center. It's got kind of a narrative story to it. There's a lot of kind of energy. And then the face, which the eye is pulled to, it kind of has a nice kind of spiral where this bright color brings your eye to it. So your face is drawn to here. There's a lot of texture and bulk here. So it kind of goes around. So I think that's a strong composition. However, if you wanted this to be more front and center, you could definitely do that. You'd have to kind of imagine or go and find the page that I didn't cut out and fill in. But, it's up to you on how to do that. Now you can also, do this off to the side, it doesn't have to be exactly unless you want it to be. So just keep that in mind. I know that with this kind of technique, it's very tempting to duplicate things exactly. And, you don't have to do that necessarily. So we're going to bring our friend out, the viewfinder, and we're going to do, you can find your grid, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to work in this quadrant. Maybe what I'll do is I'll blow it up. I'll show you how to blow it up. So if you want to blow things up, you will have to do it and you want to use a grid system. Then what you'll do is we'll start here. And what I'll do is I'll make a plan for my area. And I'll use the tape again. You're like, well, look at him. He's busted out the tape again. And I'm just going to use these to indicate where I'm going to stop and start my drawing. So I'm going to have this be here. And I'm going to have this one be maybe up here. I'm going to have maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 times 4 is 24. So we'll need at least, or 16. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we'll have to do this a little bit differently. So that's 4, 8, 12. So we'll do it like that. Well, we'll just do it, and then whatever gets cut off, gets cut off. And then we'll do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, we'll see if this works out. Again, this is something that's better to plan this out before you kind of just decide on a whim to do it, but we're just going to do it. So this one, if we start in this quadrant, there's not a lot going on up here. You've got some leaves. And then we'll move over. And remember, we're doing this in a different way. So this will be 1 to 4. And what I'm doing is kind of just blocking in this. Now, you're going to be like, what is he doing? This is not what I signed up for. And you know what? It will make more sense once it's down lower. But I also think that this is good because it's got kind of the artist's hand in it. So you're not completely, you don't have to completely do this by rote. You can still have kind of a freedom of expression to it. And when you get closer to the face and details like that, you can also definitely zoom into those things. So with this one, her head starts about here. And then we've got that kind of pattern in here. And you're like, whoa, this is looking so good. But it will shape up. So I'm just kind of roughly sketching things in, and you can spend as much time or as little time as you want doing this. But I feel like it's good to just kind of roughly sketch it in at first, and then you can go in, and of course my grid is off. All right, so the next one that I have is this one. All right, so where am I? All right, that's this one. So if I go down, it's going to be here. All right. So it's good to kind of remember where you're at. And also, one of the things that's kind of tricky in my brain is I want to do like 1-to-1, but it's definitely not going 1-to-1. It's 1-to-4. So just keep that in mind as well. But again, like I prefer to just do this like kind of freestyle. But if you are not into that and you want more of a guide, then this is more helpful if you want that kind of detail. And you're almost being like a printer where you've done the grid and now you're kind of mapping things out. And it is easier when you have it 1-to-1, just so that you can kind of see what you need to see readily. So I hope that you all are learning something from this. This is kind of a little bit tedious to watch, to be honest. Um, but it is useful if you are planning to do any kind of rendering. And you want to learn how to draw. Now, this is one of those kinds of things that can take months, if you are just into just drawing everything as you see it in every single little square. It can take a long time to render things out. So be patient with yourself. This is something that takes time. But it is a good kind of thing to do if you're learning to draw. And this helps also how you get kind of those proportions down. And of course, like the most challenging part, all the teeth are in one place. And you can definitely like block out certain shapes. And generally, when I'm just drawing free-handed, I do kind of the general to the specific. So if and I'll use different contexts. So like you can map out, like if this is, you've got this corner here, so you know that this is part of this, and then you'll divide this image up in half. So if this is the halfway mark, then you can add that information as it becomes kind of seen. And that may make no sense, but it is something that you kind of have to, you can use those context clues to to plan out your drawing. So if you know that this is in the very middle, then you can plan that to be in the very middle. So, and also if you need magnification, you can also get magnification. So that is another thing that, like, this is way off. So, like the mouse is actually smaller than I've rendered it, because there's this whole area where her face is that's not. So basically, this is all I'm doing is kind of sketching in where these images are. And when you break it down into these small kind of digestible sections, it makes it easier to see these things, you know? And they're like, what is happening? But basically, you just kind of fill in what you see, you know, in the little squares. All right. And then, so you just keep going. So we were here, and then we're going to go down. And it's kind of like the slowest printer ever. But it is something, like I was mentioning, that this is something that it takes practice. Like, even people who are successful portrait painters, they don't always use a grid. So, you know, it is a specific skill. And I think in some of like Photoshop and different things like that, they do have, there's an app for that now where you can overlay a grid. Um, and there is an app for that. So if you want to do that. All right. So I'm going to keep going. This is kind of a blob here, and it's made up of tiny things. I'm doing basically a shorthand, because otherwise we would be here for all of eternity. And, you know, that's not great, you know. I guess it is if you want to hang out for a long time. But I haven't eaten yet, so you know, I like to eat. So I think I'm gonna make butter chicken, but vegetarian. So we'll see. So that's this one. I got my grid. I was trying to be fast, and I got my grid messed up. Which, with that kind of stuff, is not super detrimental, because we're just kind of working on leaves and like corn shapes or whatever this is. So basically, this is what how to keep doing this rendering technique of drawing the grid. It's not a super fast thing. I think sometimes um, when you talk about like it being a technique or to save time, people think that it's fast. And I guess in some ways it can be faster, but realistically, the it will just take the time it takes, right? So um, it's not something that we, I think there's a sense that we want something to be like instant gratification, but that doesn't always happen. And like I said before, you can go in and detail this as much as you want. It is important that if you do this, that you kind of stick in those grids, because if you get the grid slightly off, then it becomes almost like the Picasso time, and it looks way more funky if you get it off. Which I think I may have gotten it off. But oh well. There's this one. That's that. This is. I think I'm missing one. I skipped one, so that's why it looks funky. Oh well, luckily it's just kind of in there. All right, so let's go and tighten up the face a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in really close. And you'll see a little bit more detail. I don't know if I can let me get a little bit closer. And you can also, if you want, you can make a pattern. You can make a bigger viewfinder that you can lay out if you want, and do that as well. So we've got this. And I'm just going to slowly kind of fill this in. And also, if you're having troubles rendering these shapes exactly, you can always do kind of like a rough kind of shorthand, and then kind of dig and carve out the shapes within the shape. So if it doesn't make sense, like if the proportions don't make sense for some reason, you can always play around with it. And then, so start with bigger shapes. Like there's an eyebrow here. And then there's kind of a triangle shape here. And then there's a darker kind of shape here. It's a wedge shape. And then this doesn't go out quite as far. And this hits like this. So there's also a thing, it's called an exquisite corpse. I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but you kind of put the indications of, let me zoom out a little bit further so you can actually see what I'm doing. So there's a thing called an exquisite corpse, and you mark out where things are, then you cover it up and then you pass it to somebody else. So in a way, it's almost like doing an exquisite corpse with yourself, because you're basically filling in the information that you see from there. All right, if that makes sense. So I know it's kind of it's a slow process, and kind of it feels almost tedious a little bit, but I think it once you kind of get closer in, it will make more sense. Also, as I look closer to what I drew out and it's kind of sketched in, I can see where I messed up. And what I mean by that is, um, I can see where my mind filled in the blanks of how I thought it should look. And so I adjusted it. Like this in between her eye and her eyebrow is actually really low. So it's actually like really like here. And I was trying to put it up here. So this is a real kind of where it should be and not that. That's where the eraser is useful. And there's kind of a swoop over that of hair strands. And there's a hair strand here. So when you're breaking this down, you can break this down even further into different quadrants and really get in there. It also helps if you're working like from larger to smaller, kind of like your reduction. You'll have a little bit more successful of like when you're working from a larger image and you shrink it down, like if you have a big painting and you make it smaller, it looks a lot more detailed. So, it's the kind of same principle. It's harder though to do that, but like freehand, but all right. So I'm gonna continue to work on this. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this is a kind of a quick demo. But you can see we've already made some progress. I definitely need to refine this a lot more, and go in there really much more detailed and really get in there and zoom in. And then also one of the things that I find is helpful, especially when I'm blocking things out for paint, is to get the darkest darks. And whenever I have this blocked in, I can then go in and make the blackest black. So the blackest black would be under her nose and her teeth and this little hair thing right there. And underneath the chin, there's a dark spot. And what this is it's called the value. So with her hair, it's kind of a fake value because it's black. So you have a big black right here. But basically, you want to find where your darkest parts are and then kind of find those and build those up. So that way, it adds more dimension to your piece when you're doing that. But yeah, so it doesn't look that great right now, but it does need some refining. And once we get that kind of in there, then you'll be able to see it. So I'll post a picture once I work on this a little bit more. I'll probably only do another hour or two of rendering. And then I'll show you the final product. When we go into shading, another useful trick is to make a black and white photocopy of this. And what I'll probably do is I think I have a scanner bed here, and I will take a black and white of this and kind of zoom in on this. And then that way we can work on kind of shading and rendering, you know, and make it a lot more, have a lot more dimension to it. And then I can go in and detail some of this shorthand and make it a lot more cohesive as an image. All right. So I'm going to flip this around. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you had fun. This is a technique that I don't use a ton, but it is helpful when you're learning how to draw. It does train your eye how to see things and also to kind of narrow in and be a little bit myopic in how you're kind of dissecting the space and figuring things out. If you have any questions, let me know and I will let you know, or if I have any answer. I may have missed some things because I was kind of getting into the zone of kind of rendering. So I may have missed your questions. But I don't think I saw any kind of questions besides people asking what we're putting in the food. I see a couple people tuning in. June says, I use the grid system when drawing huge posters, made transferring the drawing so much faster. I drew a comfortable size, drew a grid on top, and then enlarged the grid on the final board. Best and fastest system I found to enlarge a drawing to a large format, wall/oversized poster. This is true. You can also project things, but every system has its kind of it has its pros and cons. So if you want some things to be a lot more tightly rendered, it also depends on if you have like access to electricity. That's something to be mindful of, because like sometimes if you want to use a projector, maybe you don't have an extension cord where you can't use a projector. So this is a way that you can map things out fairly quickly, and this is quick for what it is. But yeah, we'll go back in and I'll show you how it turns out off camera. All right. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you had a lot of fun. If you missed any portion of this, you can always catch on the replay. If you are in one of those locations as a group and we're streaming right now to the Great Beat Extravaganza. And if you're in that group, sometimes it's a little bit tricky to find older videos that are not official presentations. When we do the GBE events, it's very easy to find the older presentations because we hashtag them and we put them in a certain album, and it's very easy to find. However, finding other stuff like the interim stuff can be tricky. So the easiest thing to do is either go to our Facebook page. That's the Allegory Gallery Facebook page. And it should be under the live section. Or if you go to our YouTube channel, which is, I'll put the link up for those who were not there. And you can see there we have albums of all different kinds of things. I think as we do more drawing demos and painting demos, then we'll have a specific kind of file for that, or little curation playlist for that. All right. So I will bid you adieu. Have a great night. Cases, can I share this in person at art group? Sure. The more the merrier. Just ask them to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that would be a nice way for a little tit for tat kind of thing. All right. Thank you so much. Hopefully, you all had fun. Have a great rest of your week.